100 200.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
He's a great guy.
Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 K-How.
Well, good morning. It's Thursday, my favorite day of the week. I'm Ross. Thank you so much for being here. I got to say, I really enjoyed yesterday's show with a whole bunch of veterans, Admiral Stavridis and Jack Carr and Captain Chuck Biggio and my mom. It was a really, really great show. And thanks to everybody who sent in shout outs for veterans that they know or are related to or are married to. And I'm sorry I didn't get to read out all of them on the air, but I promise you that I did read all of them, even the ones that I didn't get to. And I really loved so many of your stories about these great Americans. So thanks for helping to make yesterday's show so fantastic. Really, really appreciate it. There's obviously a lot to talk about today. I've only got one guest on the show today. That'll be at 8:05. The estimable Bill O'Reilly will join us. It seems like Bill really enjoys being on this show. So I got an email from his people asking if I wanted to have him back on the show. Sure, this guy's a really interesting commentator. So there we go. Now, I didn't spend any time yesterday talking about the election, and that was a wonderful thing. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it today because, well, there's still a lot of conversation going on, and a lot of folks are suggesting that the election isn't done yet, or that we don't know for sure who the winner is yet, even though we do. Unfortunately, we do. But as somebody once said, Shannon, it is what it is, right? So let's talk about what's going on right now. So one thing that we know is that state of Georgia, announced yesterday that they are going to do a full recount by hand, not by machine, of all of the votes in that state. Now, right now, Joe Biden's lead over Donald Trump is a little over 14,000 votes, and it's about 0.3% of the vote. And so Georgia's going to do that recount there. There's no reason to think the result will change, but before I go further into these other states, I want to make a sort of a macro point that I've been making for several days now, and I think is really important. First is, I would bet any amount of money. I would bet my net worth. I would bet $1 million. I would bet any amount of money that there will be cases of voter fraud found and proved in this election. I'm as certain of it as I am that I am going to take my next breath. And I just did. I am almost as certain that they won't get close to finding enough election fraud to overturning the results in a state, much less the results in 3 states, which is what President Trump would need to do to win this election. At first, it looked like he was going to need 2 more states, right? You remember on election night, it looked like he was going to need Pennsylvania and then either Arizona or Wisconsin or Michigan. But then Georgia flipped. So in order for President Trump to win, he would need to flip 3 states. Georgia would be the most likely. Arizona is out there. Nevada's kind of hanging out there, but it's small. And Pennsylvania, but in Pennsylvania, the lead for Biden seems insurmountable. So anyway, I also think that it's incredibly important, even if there is no chance of overturning the results of this election. I think it's incredibly important that voter fraud be found, prosecuted, and punished. Even if it's something where someone would claim this didn't make a difference in the election. On Tucker's show yesterday, they put up the names on the screen of, it seemed like at least a couple dozen, maybe more, and I think he said he had the names of a couple hundred dead people who voted in Georgia. And as I said repeatedly on this show, I think that will be found to be the most common form of election fraud, which is somebody's name is still on the voter rolls, whether many years after the person died or days after the person died, which is more understandable. Some of the stuff that Tucker talked about yesterday were people who'd been dead for more than 15 years and were still on the voter rolls. Now, that's a huge problem. Why isn't there some better communication between whatever the government department is in any particular state that handles death records and the elections division to get dead people off the voter rolls, especially during a year when states are sending ballots to everyone, whether or not the ballots were requested? Right? If they had done it just based on ballots requested, then somebody who was going to vote a dead person's ballot would at least have to take an extra step, make it that much more difficult. I will say that almost everybody who votes a dead person's ballot, and I'm just trying to be kind because really it's probably everybody, who votes a dead person's ballot knows that they're not allowed to. And I want the people who voted the dead people's ballots found, charged, and at least fined, preferably jailed for a short period of time. Right? If someone committed voter fraud, with one ballot, I don't need them in prison for a year. But $1,000 fine and 3 days or 7 days in jail, that'll be enough to dissuade people from doing it in the future, I think. The other common violation that they might find if they really look, and I wouldn't exactly call this fraud, but still illegal and still should be punished, would be ballot harvesting. And again, there's different rules in different states. In Pennsylvania, for example, ballot harvesting is illegal in almost all circumstances. Generally, if it's your ballot, you must cast it, you must mail it. The word ballot harvesting is mail in, obviously. You must mail it unless you've got a disability and you officially designate someone else to handle that ballot for you. Here in Colorado, one person can handle 10 ballots over the course of an election. Ballot harvesting, and again, depending on the state rules, whether it's within the rules or not, is a great tool that Democrats are much better at than Republicans. And I don't think they care whether they break the law on that. And it's very hard to prove. We talked about it on the show. What if one person, let's say here in Colorado, what if one person gathered 100 ballots? The limit was 10. What if one person gathered 100 ballots and then gets a friend, so now, and gives the friend 50, so they each have 50, and then they each go to 5 different ballot drop boxes within their county and put 10 in each drop box. So the cameras watching only show a person putting 10 ballots in a drop box. They'll never be caught, even though really one person did 100. You'll never prove it, which is too bad. If you do prove it, you got to just punish the bejesus out of it. And here's the thing. There's a massive amount of talk about voter fraud from Republicans and conservatives, and not just this year, since well before Trump, for years and years and years. And the conversation does feel, and I'm not saying this is wrong, it's just interesting, as if Republicans have a lot of concern about voter fraud, and Democrats simply don't. And Republicans think that Democrats want the ability for there to be voter fraud because Republicans think that Democrats are more likely to engage in voter fraud and that Republicans aren't. And over the over the modern history of the United States of America, and that's probably true, there are some examples of Republican voter fraud, but you do get the sense that in the big picture stuff, Democrats have, at least in the past, been more aggressive and better about it. Everybody of a certain age, at least, knows all the conversation about John F. Kennedy winning his election and how many dead people voted there, just as an example. But my issues with all the voter fraud stuff are not about, they're not only about, in fact, they're not even primarily about who won the election. In any given election, yes, it matters. I care who wins the election. I don't just mean this election. But what I really care about a lot, more than I care about who won any given election, is whether the American people have trust that their elections are fair and honest. What does this country do if we get to a point where a plurality of Americans believe that our elections are rigged or stolen or simply unfair? And doesn't it seem like it shouldn't be that difficult to protect against this stuff? Why do Democrats always argue against cleaning up voter rolls? Why do Democrats not seem to think it's important to find out whether people are still registered to vote in Colorado who don't live here anymore, either because they've moved out of the state or because they're dead and they literally don't live here anymore? Why do Democrats seem to not care? It sure does make even an independent like me feel as if Democrats want to keep the door open to fraud. And I don't like the Democratic Party. I don't like Democratic politicians. But this is a whole different thing. This is not about a difference on, what do we think about economics? What do we think about tax policy? Right? This is about one of the most important bedrock aspects of our nation, of any free country, of any republic or democracy, that the people believe their elections are fair. And that's why, even though I don't believe they will get close to finding even a fraction of even a 0.1% of the votes needed to overturn any of these states, I do want any legitimate, credible accusations of misconduct, whether by voters, by intermediaries, or by poll workers. I want it checked out. And to the extent that they prove anything, if anyone is convicted of breaking a law, I want them punished to the maximum degree that the law allows punishment for that crime. That doesn't mean that I'm good with people claiming that President Trump actually won this election. They're different. They're different. Look, if President Trump were, down by 300 votes in one place and 200 votes in another, that'd be a whole different conversation. But when you're down by tens of thousands of votes, you're simply not going to find enough fraud to overturn the election. And it's time for President Trump and his team to start admitting that. I don't know why the president is doing what he's doing. I don't know exactly what his goal is. Of course, he's going to make noises about running in 2024. I have no idea whether he will. I think it's 50-50 that he will. I think that if he does, he probably would not get the nomination this time. I think the rest of the party would play it a little smarter. And potentially, even if a lot of people are running, I think some of them would get out earlier if Trump were running in order to have Trump against a smaller number of opponents so that he doesn't get the nomination. That's my guess as to how they would play it. I don't know. But when you think about election recounts and recalls and not recalls, but recounts and determining whether the original reported result was wrong, in statewide elections in the United States of America in which there have been recounts, do you know how many have been overturned? How many had the results changed by recount? There were 3. The most recent was 2008, in which Al Franken beat Norm Coleman to become senator from Minnesota. And that is a race that was very, very likely decided by voter fraud. In particular, it was very likely decided by the state illegally giving ballots and giving ballots to and encouraging voting by felons who were not allowed to vote. And that almost certainly gave Al Franken the victory there. But on election night, Norm Coleman was ahead by 206 votes. 206 votes. And the swing ended up being about 500 votes, and Franken won by about 300, going from down 200 to up 300. In 2004, there was a governor's race in Washington state that was overturned after a recount. And that went from the Republican leading by 261 votes to the Democrat leading by 129. So that's only about 400 votes there. And then in 1974, New Hampshire Senate race, there was a race that went from a Republican leading by 355 votes to what was essentially a tie, and they had a new election. So in no case was there a swing more than about 500 votes, and every time a Democrat won.
Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630 KHOW, Denver. Now, Impact Traffic.
This report is sponsored by Big O Tires.
For the Betfred Sports Traffic Center, good Thursday morning. Highways in the metro area in good shape. We are crash-free. There's some overnight construction still set up the ramp from Tamarack onto southbound 225. That's creating a minor delay there at the 225 ramp to Tamarack. I-70 corridor in great shape. No trouble heading up to DIA. 270 looks good, as well as I-25 downtown at the Tech Center. Winter driving in the high country. Heavy snow, slick conditions along I-70. Chains are required between Georgetown and Vail. Denver's forecast, sunny this afternoon, high at 45, down to 22 overnight, mid-50s tomorrow, currently 23 degrees. Impacting your drive to work, Susan Phelan, 630 KHOW.
Looking to avoid the crowds? This holiday season, beat the Black Friday rush at Big O Tires. Enjoy Black Friday prices all through November. No matter what car you drive, with no credit-needed financing, they have the perfect tires for you. Only at your locally owned and operated Big O Tires.
You know, when I was looking for a dentist, especially